Good morning. I'm happy to be here with Kristo Käärmann, who's the co-founder and CEO of TransferWise.
Hey, everyone.
Kristo, could you please tell me, how did you get the idea initially for TransferWise? I understand you grew up in Estonia, you moved to London, and you had some problems paying a mortgage.
Well, I didn't really have a problem. It's very easy when you want to move money from one country to another. What you usually do is you go to your bank. I was banking with HSBC in London, and you often have to go to the bank branch to do this and fill out the forms to instruct an international wire. I was surprised, though, when I realized that a lot less money arrives than I expected. Of course, I looked at I Googled the exchange rate, what it should be, and I realized that the bank uses a completely different exchange rate than Reuters or Bloomberg or the rest of the informed world thinks it should be. So I started looking around and realized this is how the world works. Every time you move money cross-border, the bank takes a cut as a markup in the exchange rate, somewhere 3, 4, 5%. Plus, it charges the international wire fee. So at the time, I had a friend who had exact opposite problem. So he was moving money from Estonia to London because he was paid in euros and his living expenses were in pounds. What we started doing was I just gave him my pounds, and he transferred the equivalent amount of euros to me in Estonia. So we bypassed the banks on both sides and saved 5% of our money every time we needed to move it. And since then, we launched TransferWise with my co-founder Taavet 2011 as a blog post on the internet that, hey, two Estonian guys made this website where you can move money around. We're now moving $1.5 billion a month for our customers on 650 routes around the world. And what's the number that I'm most proud of, if I may share? Our customers save $1.5 million a day, every single day, on bank fees compared to if they had still been using their bank.
How much money are we talking about? How much money do the banks make on these fees globally?
McKinsey did a great study about a year ago, and they worked out if you only take deliverable currency, so excluding all trading and speculating, banks take about $200 billion of rent from money moving cross borders. Majority is this for corporates, importers, exporters. Consumers and small businesses make up a bit less than a half of that.
Mm-hmm. So how does TransferWise make money then?
We made a promise when we started, just following the same model of kind of switching money between our own users, that money always exchanges at the true exchange rate, so the same exchange rate that you see on Bloomberg and Reuters, and we made a promise that we'll never change that. So you don't have to worry about the rate. There's a rate, and that's what it's going to be. And we charge a fee openly. In Europe, we charge 0.5% of the value to move it. So you pay about $5 per 1,000.
So you've been scaling up. You've received a lot of venture funding. How do you choose where you're going? You recently opened in Singapore, maybe China? Correct.
It's a very good question, and we had immense debates within the team. We're about 800 people now, so kind of figure out and everyone agreeing what to do next is tricky. We have this. The right answer, of course, is listen to your customers. Mm-hmm. So we have this thing called currency wishes. When someone comes onto TransferWise and they can't send money somewhere where they want to, they leave a wish. And these are actually super good predictors of where the growth is going to be. So we launched Israel last week, just because it was the highest wished country, mm-hmm. and it's doing amazingly already.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Are there ever problems with governments, say in China or Singapore, or I mean, obviously, there can be, some bad characters who want to move money, and banks have traditionally, held themselves up to be, protectors and watchdogs of that.
Well, not very successfully, though, unfortunately, given just the fines that they have had to pay for keeping an eye closed. Mm-hmm. But it's a good question. So of course, as we started, we realized that this is a licensed activity. We're managing other people's money, and we have to make sure that baddies can't use this way of moving money. So we're licensed everywhere we operate. We're in licensed by 39 countries, so government of Japan, Singapore, 42 states in the US, Europe.
So you have to get a
Brazil,
license wherever you operate.
exactly, exactly. And of course, then you follow the regulations, and we built a pretty clever systems how we make it super hard for bad guys to get onto our platform, so they rather use their banks or try and use the banks.
So is there evidence that you're getting under the skin of banks? I guess Santander recently issued a report that said that their profits would fall quite dramatically if they had to match your fees. I see you're smiling at that.
Well, I shouldn't be. Actually, there was a bit of a revelation for us as well. When we started with Tavet, we thought that banks are just making an absolute killing on this thing. Like $200 billion is a lot of money. It's an immense amount of money to be taken as revenue out of this, where we're really just moving information across borders. Modern money isn't anything more, just like credit and security around this. But then we learned over time that actually banks have an incredibly high cost base to do the same thing. Again, referring to the same McKinsey report, it costs, so just to give you an idea, it costs 7 times more for a bank to do a foreign exchange transaction than it costs us.
Why is that?
Well, I have an opinion. I don't know if hypothesis. I don't know if it's true. My guess is because banks have never had to compete. No one has ever switched their bank because of high foreign exchange cost. The fees were not transparent. Most people don't know. We did surveys. We find that 82% of people don't know how much they're actually paying in fees because they're hidden in the exchange rate. And for a layman, it's really hard to work out. You get the calculator out and look at the rate in Reuters and see what the bank did to you. And then you usually find it out 2 weeks later after the money arrives. So it's really hard. And it's been easy for banks to charge from their own customers because they wouldn't leave and they wouldn't go anywhere else. Well, that has changed now. And in the UK, we've bypassed some of the smaller banks, the ones that you mentioned. We're moving more money for consumers in and out of the country than these banks do. And looking at how things are going, we're probably going to be the largest money mover in the UK compared to banks pretty soon.
There's been a lot of talk about fintech taking on the financial system and banks. Is this, would you say, taking a step back, one of the earliest, more successful ways that tech startups are challenging the banks?
I would say so, and that's mainly because fintechs, it takes a long time to get significant market share. That's happening to us in the UK. We're really, bypassing banks and starting to be the largest, and we're seeing banks really struggling. And I don't smile here. I'm actually worried because this product has never been a high priority for them. They make most of their money out of mortgage and other things. It's usually a cost base for them. Actually, we started seeing this maybe 3 years ago when we saw lots of people signing up in Hungary, of all places, to TransferWise. And we asked them, we always ask people, where did you hear about TransferWise, etc. And they said, a lot of them said, our bank suggested to use TransferWise.
Your banks? Really?
Yeah, and we were really surprised. So we started looking into this, and apparently there was a small bank in Hungary. Their own employees and managers use TransferWise naturally for their own purposes. And they realized that it's better for them to for their customers to have a great user experience than to use their internal correspondent banking SWIFT network where money gets lost, it's expensive for the bank. So they just, I even have a screenshot. They put our banner onto, or made a banner with our logo without asking us, and put it on their homepage as a kind of recommended way to use TransferWise. And they taught their client staff how to onboard people onto our service, and that was amazing.
Right.
Since then, of course, we've seen that all the new banks that get started, there's a few in Europe, number 26, and Monzo and Starling. They're not going to integrate Deutsche Bank for correspondent banking. They're integrating TransferWise. And what's quite fascinating, and maybe there's an idea for other fintech startups, the way that it works is like OAuth if there's engineers in the room, which means that almost like sign on with Google. So when you click make an international payment in the number 26, number 26 is a bank in Germany. It's a weird name. I don't know how they got it, but if you click on make an international payment, you link your account with TransferWise, so you can use TransferWise from within your number 26 app. It happens all the time with kind of tech products, and log in with Google, log in with Facebook. But now we're seeing that in banking, and it's very exciting.
So little banks and startups support you. Are big banks, are they Santander, JP Morgan, Deutsche Bank, are they starting to object to your licenses? Or do anything to try to block you?
Well, they can't, and they shouldn't. And it's also a little bit risky to take an anti-competitive stance against kind of a small player that is actually giving advantage to consumers. And you're right, so you refer to the Santander leak in Guardian. They are thinking about this, and high points for them to think about. There has to be a solution, and of course, they can do the same thing that the neobanks do, just integrate TransferWise and offer that to their customers. I personally find it's the right thing to do, but we'll see how it's going to play. Especially in the markets where we have high traction, it's going to become really, really interesting just to watch the dynamic where, on one hand, consumers and small businesses have this TransferWise app that is totally transparent, tells them how much the fees are, and then the rest of the people have to use, the banks have to convince them to use their own app. And at the same time, they have the choice of integrating TransferWise. So I'm very, very curious of how that's going to play out. I don't think it's happened yet in fintech, in other products.
I want to talk about consumers for a moment. You've probably done studies of, not only the EU, but just how global the world is becoming, how many people need to actually transfer money from one country to another. Could you talk about that? Do you think that's still going to grow even in this era where globalization is perhaps being reconsidered?
It's a very good question, and I know your administration in this country is trying to kind of lead towards the opposite, and that might be successful temporarily. But if we look around the world, it's just getting more global. Businesses that get started these days are like potentially large businesses. They're never going to be local. They're going to be selling everywhere. People move much more between countries, and that's going to continue to happen. I mean, we're going to put walls up, and they're not going to work. And someone will figure out that it's much better for everyone if the walls come down.
Mm-hmm. And for consumers, is there a percentage basis that TransferWise is? How much cheaper is it if they use TransferWise versus a bank?
So for consumers, I'm using Europe as an example. In the UK, we charge an average 0.5%, so $5 per thousand. Banks would usually charge about $25 of the open international wire fee, and then about 4% of the exchange rate markup. So on $1,000, it would be, what was it? About $75 versus $5. That's roughly the
$75 versus $5. Yeah. So a big difference.
It is. And as you go to bigger amounts, the bigger the difference becomes.
So you have a backing by Andreessen and a lot of prominent VC firms. Perhaps not surprisingly, there's other competitors who have entered this space. As you're trying to scale and get bigger, how are you going to differentiate TransferWise?
Well, the differentiator is really going to be the thing that matters to our users. So we've been doing this for 7 years, and it's become incredibly clear what people care about, what our users care about. They care about speed, they care about cost, actually cost first, speed second, and convenience. Just these three things. It doesn't matter if they're Lithuanian or Pakistani or American, doesn't matter. These are the three things that they care about. So we're now able to, just to give an example on speed, we're able to do things that have never been possible before. We can move money from a UK bank account to any European, like Italian bank account in 40 seconds. So money leaves a UK bank account, like HSBC or Barclays or whichever, and arrives in an Italian bank account in like 40 seconds later. That was never possible. And what's beautiful in that, then no one can call up and ask where the money is.
What about Bitcoin? There are lots and lots of predictions about Bitcoin. Some of them may be years off, depending on who you're talking to. Some of them may be, quite present. Couldn't Bitcoin just come and completely supplant the need for this?
Completely. I've been very excited about Bitcoin or blockchain rather, the technology behind it. And you're absolutely right. Once the world converts to using Bitcoin or any other cryptocurrency, there won't be any currencies. So we don't need transfers. I think like national currencies really is a bit of a UX disaster. They're costly, and they create this market for banks to take 200 billion of rent every year. And they create a need for TransferWise, so we're solving this kind of national currencies problem. Of course, if Bitcoin kind of takes over the world, then we don't need TransferWise, and that would be great in some ways. Unfortunately, what I've kind of realized, I didn't think this is going to happen. I was really excited about blockchain as a medium of exchange, a medium of payment. I've noticed it's become more of a medium of storage, a kind of a reserve. The reserve currency properties of Bitcoin have kind of taken over recently, which is not what I expected, and that means it's not going towards the direction of Bitcoin becoming a universal money that we hold.
Would you consider doing a Bitcoin application?
We have, so there's actually two questions there. Of course, at one point, if there's more, as soon as there's more usefulness on Bitcoin, we should consider adding Bitcoin as a currency. So we have this currency wishes that we talked about. At this point, there are so many more real-world currencies that people need compared to Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is quite far down there.
Right. So you've launched a couple unorthodox advertising campaigns to draw up publicity. Could you tell them about one attracted a bit of controversy?
I think I know what you mean. So our challenge has been from the outset the fact that most people are not aware of how much they're being charged when they make a bank transfer, and we've just looked for like quirky and funny ways how to draw attention to this. So the campaign, I think you referred to that started this was Nothing to Hide. So me and my co-founder, some of our employees and customers, we got like half naked or in our underwear, protesting in the city of London against the hidden bank fees. So the story there was that we have nothing to hide, but looks like the banks have quite a bit to hide, and we've followed this theme in our advertising, or more like campaigns. We had one recently in Toronto, which was there's a massive, huge alarm clock that we made, it was a wake-up call that ended up with a pillow fight in front of one of the banks in Toronto.
So does that speak to kind of the broader challenge that startups face? The technology works, but just getting the word out is still a huge challenge.
I guess so. I mean, it has to be the way that we think about it internally is we have to be super clear of what is the consumer problem that we're solving. And for us, the consumer problem is very clear. It's just incredibly expensive and cumbersome to move money across borders. And we've realized that it's the awareness. It's not that we should advertise, hey, you can do this with TransferWise, but it's more that, hey, have you realized what's happening whenever you make this transfer?
So you're based in the city of London. There's obviously been a lot of talk about Brexit. London has really emerged as a center of fintech. Do you think that's going to continue? New York is obviously one as well.
I heard some mumbling from the audience. They might not agree with you.
I said a center.
A center. It is an A center, and we started in London. I was based in London when we started TransferWise. And Europe is a good place to start this business. So I'll bore you with a bit of regulatory detail. There's definitely something that EU got right for all their sins, and that was rethinking kind of banking regulation and also other financial regulation maybe 15 years ago now. So what they did was they split down what a bank means from a licensing perspective into different kind of functional products. So they have a license specifically for payments and payment processing. So you need to do a set of things as a company to be able to process other people's money. Then they have a separate license for stored value. So if you want to hold other people's money, there's a license for that. And then if you want to hold someone's money and actually give it out as loans with a promise that you somehow pay them back, then you need a prudential license, which is similar to a banking license here. So they've done a really great job of kind of splitting it up, which meant that it was much easier for someone to start and enter that market because the licensing was clear and appropriate. And therefore, there's more competition than in other places. It's been quite interesting for us because we kind of go around the world and regulators often come to us in a similar way. Like, we see this fintech is happening, and like how do we make sure that our consumers are benefiting from this? Lots of people are thinking about this. You have the OCC charter, I think, coming up. That's a great. Having just been through the licensing process in 42 states, it's great news for anyone coming after us.
Because you may potentially avoid having to go to each one of those states individually.
Exactly.
So do you think London then, with Brexit, it will take some time, but are you looking at needing to be in locations throughout Europe rather than
Yes,
London?
It's a good question, and I have to tell you a secret. In London, actually, no one knows what's going to happen. The wind changes all the time, and it's best not to pay attention for a little while. We're maybe a step ahead because we're already in multiple places in Europe. We have about 400 people in Tallinn, Estonia. We have an office of 70 people in Budapest. We have people in Japan, Singapore, New York, Tampa, a few other places around the world. So we like to think about ourselves not as the UK company or an EU company or an American company, but a world company where we're as much Japanese as we are American.
There's a lot of entrepreneurs in the crowd. What would the biggest piece of advice be that you might have for someone who's thinking of starting a company or scaling a technology?
There's a million little fights that you need to win, but maybe the major ones are it's worth trying to solve a real problem for users and a hard one. There are a lot of great products get started that make something just a little bit more convenient or a better UX on things, but don't really change the infrastructure of how the world works. These are great things to do, and they need to be done, but I just look for a bigger challenge if you can.
And we were talking backstage about your travel schedule. What is your biggest challenge as TransferWise now scales up? Are you concerned about growing too fast or too slow?
So let me put it this way. When we were growing headcount, we're basically doubling headcount every 6 months for 3 years in a row. That was scary. That was really scary. I'm not worried about this. We kind of build up the muscle to bring on new people, and our engineering team is still doubling, actually faster than about every 9 months. This is awesome. You kind of see how much more you can do every next quarter. I'm actually pretty happy at this point. I'm just very, very intrigued and excited to see what will happen in this industry, both in a cross-currency money, but also in other parts of technology where clearly banks haven't really innovated in the last 30, 40 years much, and there's a lot of opportunity here to change.
Well, Kristo, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rebecca.